Hello, it's Sue Anstis here, and just before you listen to this episode of The Game Changers, I wanted to quickly tell you that my new documentary, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is now available to watch on Netflix in the UK. It's a powerful film that explores the recent growth in women's sport and its impact across society. It will open your eyes to the challenges faced by female athletes and bring hope for a future where women and girls have equal access and opportunity in sport. I really hope you enjoy it. Now it's time for the Game Changers. Hello and welcome to the Game Changers. It's hard to believe we're already on Series 8 of the podcast. But nothing's changed. It's still the place that you can hear from extraordinary, trailblazing women in sport. I'm your host, Sue Anstis, and I'd like to start with a massive thank you to Barclays for once again sponsoring this series of The Game Changers. There's no doubt that few brands have done more for women's sport than Barclays. They're the title sponsor of the Women's Super League, and they also back the FA in the fantastic work it does to ensure that every schoolgirl across the country has a chance to play football by 2024. We start this series with the most incredible guest, the most capped player in the history of English football. It's Fara Williams. She's considered one of the greatest footballers of all time, having represented her country at European Championships, World Cups, and for Team GB at London 2012. I still find it hard to believe that whilst playing for England, Fara was homeless, but she's been really open in talking about this, and as a result of her work with charities in this area, she received an MBE in 2016. So of all the incredible matches and tournaments she's played in, what's her favourite memory?
I think for me it has to be my home debut for England. We played at Portsmouth, and just because it was literally an hour down the A3 from where I lived, so in terms of family and friends really being allowed to come and watch and support, I had great support there. It has to be, and I scored on my debut, my home debut. So yeah, I think for all of those different reasons, that has to be the standout. And then it was the start of my journey in terms of my international career. So it will always be the one that will be right up there in terms of being my favourite.
And it's a good answer as well, because you don't have to pick a team or anybody else and show any favouritism, do you? And had you ever imagined that you would play for your country when you were growing up?
No, and you know what, even women's footballers in general, I literally knew nothing about women's football. I had two brothers and a sister that were keen footballers, and we, growing up on an estate in Battersea was literally what we did every single day. Got a ball and we was out there playing. My uncle, my aunties were out there with us. And, kids in general on an estate, it was probably the in thing to do. And so I just played and fell in love with football, big Chelsea fan, and so was going to the games. And yeah, it wasn't until, I can't remember, there was one game, and I can't remember how many years ago because I'm quite old now, but it was England against Scotland, and it was at Bolton. And I remember Angie Banks scoring a goal for England, and that was the first time I'd ever seen an England women's team live on TV. So it was on Sky at the time, and I was like, oh, there's an England women's team. Not that then, even that game, although I saw it, I never thought about playing for England, but it certainly opened my eyes up into thinking that potentially there might be at some point a career in the women's game. So it was that game. But as a youngster, I never had any aspirations to be an England player or a footballer in general. I just loved playing football.
That's really interesting. We should go and find out what that game was that kind of set the ball rolling, as it were.
Yeah.
And you obviously went on to become England's most capped player, as you mentioned, so male or female. So did it feel as magic putting that shirt on each time as you moved kind of throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, every single time I put the shirt on, it meant more each time I put it on. I think if you ask any players, past, present, that I've played with alongside playing for England, I think, they can only tell you what it means to me to play for England and represent them. I think I tried to demonstrate that as much as I could when I put that shirt on in every game. And look, we all have good and bad games and indifferent games, but certainly not through the will or want of trying my hardest every time I wore it. And yeah, I wore it with great pride until the very last moments of wearing that shirt against Australia for 10 minutes. So I remember every single match as if it was my first, and never took for granted the position I was in terms of getting selected. And you ask anybody that knows me, every time there was a tournament or selection, I'd be the first one doubting myself as to whether I'd get a letter, or it started as a letter years ago and then it turned to emails and then it was the phone calls. So yeah, I mean, I'd panicked every time. Am I going to be selected? Is this the time I miss out? So yeah, I certainly kept myself on my toes in terms of that.
And taking us back to where it all began, which you mentioned, and I believe you used to go and watch Chelsea, as you say, with your family. So what do you remember from those days?
You know, the first game we played Luton, it was 3-3. I remember Kerry Dixon, an old player, striker of Chelsea. But yeah, that was probably my first game I remember for Chelsea. But then, yeah, the generation of Dennis Wises, you think Jody Morris, I'm trying to think, Frank Sinclair, Michael Doobie, they were like our defenders at the time, which, you know, two of the Blues brothers that we used to call them. And yeah, and then the generations changed in terms of who we watched. And we got, you know, started to get some foreign players in, and the likes of Ruud Gullit and Zola and Vialli. So yeah, I mean, I was mad crazy Chelsea fan, and every week returning from a home fixture I'd run back, so literally it was 20 minutes over the bridge in terms of walking to the game, and it'd probably be 5 minutes returning from the game, because once you watch it you just want to get out in the cage. And me and my brothers would literally run from the stadium all the way back to where we lived on the estate, and like whoever had done well that day, you know, in the cage, that was the player you were that day. And you know, and pretty much everybody, whether they were at the game or watched it, they would know who had done well through goals. And yeah, we all tried to, I guess, mirror image who we just thought done well in that game. So yeah, it was real cool.
And how did you then come to play for the club?
Luckily I was at a Chelsea game, and in the programme there was like literally, it must have been this minute, a little advertisement. Chelsea were looking for some players for their under 14s it was, and yeah, and I decided to, I think it was my uncle, he rang and asked where the trials were, how to get there. Got some brief details, which, you know, as a kid, when you're excited to have a trial for the team that you support, I probably didn't listen to the finer details. And I remember going to the trials, and I got myself to Morden, had to get to Morden Station. They said, when you get to Morden Station, you take the 164 and it pretty much takes you to this field. And as I said, I didn't listen to the small details, and I took a 163 bus. It took me somewhere else. Anyway, I ended up having to get off this bus and walk in an hour, you know, to the field. And I ended up getting there, I think it was maybe half an hour before the end of the 3-hour trial.
Oh my God.
But luckily I impressed, because they chose me. Casey Stoney was there at the time. She was observing as somebody that was a current player. Yeah, they asked me who I'd played for. I was like, nobody. And they took me on. It was surprisingly they did. But I guess I never doubted my talent when I went there. I didn't feel I needed that much time.
That's fantastic. So that whole bus journey, that could have changed the whole of your career path if you haven't got to the trials.
I was thinking this bus journey was forever, and I was like, I can't see this field. They said it was 10 minutes from the tube station, and yeah, and that was a difficulty. I mean, I grew up in a family. My mum, she brought 4 of us up, and so in terms of getting us from A to B, you know, and it was a lot easier, more trusted to travel in terms of the London transport. You know, you were trusted as young adults to go and get on the transport. So yeah, I very much did that in terms of going to school. So I was very used to getting on London transport. But yeah, it was difficult, because obviously if she was able to take me, then I'd have probably got there on time.
Only 12? Were you 12 at the time?
Yeah, 12. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you're right though, isn't it? That change in attitudes in terms of moving ourselves around and transport and so on. And I guess as you then progressed and developed, what was it like walking on the pitch at Stamford Bridge as a player then, having been in the crowd in the past? Yeah,
I did it I did it for Chelsea, but only in like a small-sided, so they're like mini tournaments. So I actually got to play for Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, but only in a small-sided tournament. But yeah, unbelievable, surreal, I guess. It was more nervy. I went back there maybe 3 years ago now as a celeb, and just going, I was so nervous. I was like, why am I so nervous? Like, I'm with like a bunch of girls that like, you know, that, but yeah, it was just nervy. But yeah, it's, you know, apart from Wembley, it's the one ground that I would say, if people was to say, what's the best ground you played at, it has to be Stamford Bridge.
Excellent. And how did the coaching, that early coaching you receive, impact the way you played throughout your career, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of actually getting coached really young, I probably wasn't coaching. We went there, we did a little bit of small drills. It was more facilitating us and putting us into matches and literally giving us an opportunity to play. So back then, I think the best thing about my mum, being a coach now myself with younger players, I think the best thing now when I reflect on my younger days is that my mum wasn't always there to watch games and training, but what my mum always did was ask me how training and games went. So she was always allowed to see and hear it from my point of view. And so there was never any bad when I'm telling mum how well I did in training. So in terms of my development and being allowed to make mistakes without being criticized, and you know I've seen and heard kids and that car journey home with parents that they can be quite critical of them so young, and that's your development stage of when you're learning, and mistakes you're going to make quite often until you find your way. So that's why I think as an adult, as a senior player, making mistakes was never something I was scared of, because I was allowed freedom to do it so young without being judged by my coaches at the time, or as I say, parent, because she wasn't there that much to watch me. And I just told her how good I was every time I went home.
I love that. That's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know you've talked a lot in the past about your kind of history, and you received an MBE for your charity work, but it does still astound me that you faced years of homelessness and living in hostels when you were playing for Chelsea and then Charlton. So can you just tell me a little bit more about what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it was a family breakdown. I was a stubborn teenager, as most people are. Yeah, ended up, in a hostel, and I was stubborn. I thought I knew better. I thought could attack the big bad world, and it wouldn't be something I would ever advise to young teenagers. And there's family breakdowns everywhere in life. It happens all the time. But you start to grow as an adult, and you think and you don't want to listen to mum's experiences of life, or dad or grandma or whatever, sisters, brothers, and you choose your own path. And yeah, I mean, it definitely wouldn't be something I'd encourage, and it was probably lasted longer than it would have needed to, just through pure stubbornness. But it taught me loads of lessons. I grew as a young woman into an adult, and had to grow up quite quickly. Had to learn, how to cook, clean, wash. So all of those life skills that you need, I kind of got really early and grew from it. I think it makes me the person I am today. So I wouldn't change any of my journey. But yeah, and I wouldn't say it was difficult, because I've always been, my mum's brought me up really well, and I'm really appreciative of anything that I have anyway. So just having that roof over my head, being able to go back somewhere and eat, and as I say, have a roof and a TV, it was all fine. It was fine. I could wash. I was well looked after. So yeah, I just see it as a small hurdle in my journey and in my footballing journey, but certainly is something that shaped me into the person I am today.
And the work that you're doing now with Centrepoint and other charities and things, do you think it's important that we change those perceptions? As you say, it could happen to anybody through losing jobs and houses and a family breakdown. Do you think it's important that we change that perception in terms of homelessness?
Yeah, and it changed my perception, because, as a kid, all you knew about homelessness was what you would be classed as the tramps on the street, and that's what we used to call them, very disrespectfully. We all did, and that's all we knew. They're scavenging from bins because that's all they knew, and you don't know why or how they got into that position. And we're very judgmental. Me, as I say, as a kid growing up, very ignorant to it, like most of us are.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's through being homeless and speaking through people that have been. There's business people that have lost their business, that have become homeless because they can't afford, to no longer pay the mortgage. They lose their house, they lose everything. So, it can happen to anybody. And it was an eye-opener to me in terms of, coming homeless myself. But yeah, I think the wider perception of it, you certainly need to open up our eyes to it. And there's certainly the youth homelessness is the one that worries me the most, because I think it's maybe over 80% of it is through family breakdown, and that's a difficulty in trying to understand there are some really good homeless groups out there that really try and get young adults to get back in with their families, rebuild broken relationships, and get them back in safe home environment where they should be able to grow and obviously work and have a future. But yeah, there are some great work going on out there, but as you say, the wider perception of it certainly needs to change, because it's not it's not just an alcoholic that is homeless, and if you read deeper into it, sometimes these people that look as if they're alcoholics turn to alcohol when they become homeless, because they know no different. They try and numb pain, and addiction becomes part of the pain, and so they think they can mask it. So you can go really deep into it, and if you've got time and you really want interest in it, then if you was to go and volunteer, which is what I did early on with the homelessness in Liverpool, you find out different stories, and it certainly opened, as I said, my eyes up to what homelessness is.
And I think, as you mentioned, that communication, isn't that in terms of family breakdown, but I've seen some of the helplines that are there available now to almost help rebuild those bridges that perhaps didn't happen for you over years. It might have been different if that had been around at the time,
Oh yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, definitely. And I say that I did one charity in it's not Birmingham, a bit further on, can't remember exactly, where they do that and they get people and the amount of stories that I had the opportunity to go up and speak to a couple of girls that ended up in this hostel or temporary accommodation whilst they were fixing a broken relationship with mum and dad and people within the household. It's fantastic because honestly, you're too young to attack the world at 16, 17 and 18, even, 20. It's a tough world out there. It's not easy to live alone. I mean, especially if you live in London, certainly in London in terms of house prices or even rental prices, and that's why people do end up on the street. But yeah, there are, as I say, some really good charities out there that are really trying hard to rebuild those bridges that, have been burnt a little bit in the past.
And how important for you was football at that time? Clearly it was, but how did that help you at the
Yeah,
time?
crucial. I think football has been my out. I think even before being homeless, football, was an out for me. Anything happening at home bad, anything happening bad in school, anything, in life that I was fearful of or whatever, I just got football and was able to go and get my football and take, whether it be frustration or even when in happy times, I still wanted to go to the football. It was the one thing that was loyal to me and I was loyal to the football, I guess. Like we were loyal to each other. I had it there all of the time for anything that, whenever I needed it, and I was just able to just pick up my football and go and do what I needed to do to just distract me from anything and everything.
And I guess what's probably even more extraordinary is in that time you were also playing for England. And when you think about, or even imagine someone like a David Beckham or Wayne Rooney, secretly being homeless but playing on the England team, it's just obviously clearly unbelievable. But did that inequality ever strike you?
No, I mean, in terms of ever comparing, people have asked that after, could you imagine if it was David Beckham, like you just said? And I never
Right.
compared men and women's football back then. And I kind of, my first steps into football I never ever thought that I would be famous, a professional footballer like the men. I never ever compared. I loved it through, what it gave to me and the enjoyment I got through doing it. So I never thought of it like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the FA at the time were really helpful to me. Hope Power, in particular, was really helpful to me. And so I was just grateful for those, those people there that was hands-on with me in terms of always checking in, always making sure that everything was okay with me. And that's more important than any money, because as you say, money can come and go. We just spoke about people that, you could be a millionaire and homeless tomorrow. So for me, in terms of that, just people's time and effort that they gave me in difficult moments where I could just pick up the phone or they picked it up to me just to check in. I knew that I had good people around me. It just made me feel a bit, safe, I guess.
And I love that you recognise the women who have been supportive of you. On I think there's a post on International Women's Day on your Instagram. So I guess who are those other women? You mentioned Hope there that have been inspirational to you over your career.
Yeah, so I think if I can remember, my sister, so my big sister, she's always somebody that I've always looked up to. I get if you have siblings, you'll know, anyone, brothers, sisters that are older, you kind of always like, I want to be like my big sister. So she's always been important to me. There was my two best friends that have been there right from the beginning of my journey through football and still are there now. They played actually when we was younger, but they no longer play. So that was Zerfa and Lauren. Put my partner on there, my current partner. My mum, who's been my hero, throughout everything in terms of her own personal life, that, things that we had to see and how strong, the strength that she's shown us through all kinds. She's the main one. Mo Marley, because she was the one that helped me escape the hostel from London and actually go up to Liverpool and be given an opportunity in terms of my coaching. I remained really loyal to her in terms of playing. I had opportunities to disappear from Everton and go abroad, but just through her loyalties that she showed me, I felt very loyal to her until she left the club. They're the main people for me that have helped me and that are still there for me and that see me for me and nothing else.
And you've obviously played, as you say, for over 20 years now. So an extraordinary career. How have you changed as a player? Do you feel you've changed as a player over that time?
I think I've learned. I think I've learned tactically over the years. So my understanding of football has certainly improved. I think technically I've got better in my later years, especially in the last 4 years with Reading, with a coach there, Phil, who, technically has taught me a lot. But I think I've always been the same player in terms of like, you'll have some players in football that, performance is just about them. Whereas I've always put the team before my own individual performance. So long as, even if I have an absolute stinker, as disappointed as I'd be, if it was the right thing for the team and, my poor performance didn't reflect the outcome of the game, then I'd be happy. So I'd always put the team before my own individual needs as a player.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That is, I guess it's a culture, your own view that stayed with you for the whole of your playing career. I was going to ask you actually about Reading, because you said that you kind of moved there to help improve your game, and whether, I guess many people who've played as long as you would be surprised that you were still looking to improve your game after so long. But clearly, as you say, you feel it has done. Do you ever think what sort of player you might have been if you'd had that level of technical coaching from when you got started as a young girl?
Yeah. You know what, especially these last 4 years, because they are I think pretty much in the women's game, we've had real good tactical coaches throughout my career, puts real good game plans. And sometimes we fell short a little bit with our technical execution. And that's just because the game hasn't been professional. We haven't had qualified coaches at youth age groups to really help that detail. But certainly these last 4 years, I mean, I left Arsenal having, in my head, my plan was to go to Arsenal and finish my career there. I think I was 30, can't remember, 32 maybe when I signed for them. So I thought 2-year contract and then I'm retired and done. But yeah, I really didn't enjoy my time there, not, for many different reasons. And so because of that, I wanted to go somewhere where I could finish my career, where I would enjoy the game and love the game like I've always done throughout. And Reading was a team that, when we played against them for Arsenal, excited me in terms of how they tried to play, not with the highest caliber of players, but in terms of what they got out of the caliber of players they had, showed me there must be the coaching strategies must be good. And then when I had a conversation with them, and the coach said he's excited to make me get better, and he thinks that he can improve me in areas. And you're 33 listening to somebody telling you they can improve you when you think you're coming to the end. I was like, I like this opportunity. I really want to learn. And actually, they didn't disappoint. I think in the last 3-4 seasons that I've had at Reading, I've certainly improved as a player and as a person. So they were true to their word. I'll give them that. And I've said that to anybody that's asked me about the club, that the coaching is really of a high technical level.
That's so good to hear, isn't it? And I guess, do you carry that now over into some of you're obviously doing your own coaching. Are you a very different coach as you are to a player on the pitch? You have a different persona?
A little bit. I think it's difficult because you still, whilst I'm playing, I still have that kind of, competitor, that player, that mindset where the standards are really high and sometimes you forget the level of players that you're coaching. So I still have those high demands and standards that I'm sure will flip as I turn into a coach and kind of start to understand people a little bit better. But yeah, there's certainly some things there that my preferences is probably what I coach more of. So as a player, what I prefer, they're the type of sessions I'd probably gravitate towards more so than any other.
And it must have been really upsetting for you when Phil Neville didn't choose you for the World Cup squad in 2019. So how did you feel about that decision at the time?
Of course, listen, I was gutted that I didn't get selected. But what I did was prepared myself for that, because the selection was around May 2019 selection. But in 2018, in the October, I remember receiving the call from Phil to say that I wasn't being selected for the final qualification game. He just said to me he felt like my form had dipped and I wasn't playing at the levels that I would expect for myself. And it was an opportunity for him to look at some younger players. And I just said, okay, thank you, and put the phone down, didn't challenge it. And that's the person I am. And that's what I'm saying. I always put people before myself. I would never challenge a manager or a coach in their decisions. I'd like to think that I would understand why, or, if not, it's your decision. And it's about opinions, football. So, but I was disappointed at the time because I felt his reasoning was really poor. At the time, I was probably in the form of my life. I was scoring goals. I was assisting. I was probably over 50% of Reading's, in terms of goals and assists. I was over 50% in terms of stats for our club. So I got into team of the month that he actually dropped me. So there was loads of things that I was thinking, actually, your reasoning wasn't good. I didn't agree with your reasoning. I accept your decision, but I don't agree with your reasoning. And I never challenged him. Then the next time I spoke to Phil was when he told me I wasn't playing. I wasn't selected. And it wasn't because I wanted to speak to him. He asked me, after telling the media he'd spoke to me, he asked me, could he call me? And so I said, yep. And then he called me and explained why he didn't take me, again, which I didn't agree. I thought it was more to do with my age rather than anything. I felt I had a place in that squad. You're taking a 20, 21, 23 player, I think it was 23 player squad. And I'd been to 7 previous tournaments, and I had vast experience of international football and tournament football, and had a know-how. And even if he wasn't to play me, I still felt I would have had an impact off the pitch in terms of all of the experiences I had at that moment. And, it was his first year or 18 months into the squad. So I felt I had a place. I mean, listen, he'll have his reasons. I'll have my beliefs as to why I felt he didn't pick me. And that's football and its opinions. And listen, I'm somebody that was acceptant of that, whether I agreed or I didn't. And that's how I've always played out my career, even at the times at Arsenal, when I reflect on Arsenal, you know what, I didn't deserve to play. I had a lot going on off the pitch. And, as much as I fell out with the coach, he was also right in his decisions at times. And I can accept that because I'm a player that likes to understand tactics. And there's times that tactics, listen, sometimes coaches play me in a game when the tactics don't actually suit my attributes. And that's probably because they know in moments I could probably deliver something different to somebody else. So I think that's just because of my awareness of the game and understanding of the game. I'm somebody that likes to, or I easily accept decisions because I know it's about opinions, and there's no opinion that's right, but the person in charge at that moment.
And did you ever think about sort of lobbying to go along in some kind of non-playing role in terms of coaching? Or because I do feel, as you say, all that experience and so on could have had such an impact.
I mean, I was gutted. I was gutted. But no, I didn't. I don't think Phil would have considered me as somebody that would. I mean, he didn't consider me as somebody that had experience that could have helped. I think, his reasoning, he said he didn't want somebody that has achieved what I have to sit there on the bench. But I mean, I'd have preferred him to ask me, do you not think, even though I don't see you as somebody that can impact the game from the start, I would like to have thought that he might have asked, do you think you can impact as a squad player and have the same sort of impact? But I never got the opportunity to. And I prepared for it. As I said, I got told in October that I weren't going to that one camp. And I knew from then the opportunity to go to a World Cup, when you're getting dropped to, I think I was 36 at the time, or 35 I was, then I'm not going to be picked again. So I knew the one time I didn't get picked at that age, there wasn't going to be an opportunity again. The funny thing was he picked me again after the World Cup just to prove his point that he would pick me again and that it wasn't my last chance. And then it was, because that was the last camp I ever went to. So yeah.
And what do you think, I guess looking forward, what do you think the impact could be for kind of home Euros for women's football in the UK in 2022?
I think with the media, I think with the buy-in from the BBC and Sky at the minute, I think that's massive for the women's game in terms of really giving it a platform that, that it's worked hard to get in terms of showcasing the game. So there's been a lot of work that's gone on over the years, and even before my time, during, and there will be after. I think that will definitely help. In terms of the personnel that we have, players, I would like to think we have high hopes of winning the home Euros in terms of the calibre of player and the talent within this England group at the minute. In terms of results and where the group looks at right now, I'm not sure that Serena will have enough time to turn that team around. Me, more than anybody, would like to think that she did it with Holland and took them really late and won a home Euros with them. My hope is that she's able to do exactly the same with our group of players when she takes us in September, because she is a fantastic coach. She's a no-nonsense coach that will just, quite straight talking, very intelligent in terms of her knowledge of the game, very experienced in terms of her playing. So, I'm excited. When she was appointed, it was a shock because of how good a coach I see her to be. And I just didn't think that she'd leave, the Dutch team to come to England. So we're lucky to have her. I'm hoping that she can transition it, real quick, as a real quick turnaround. But something needs to change. I think the culture, we need to get the culture that we created. I think we need to get that back, from an outsider looking in. I think we've lost a little bit of the good culture that was created there. And whether that be through Phil's times or through the inconsistencies of different managers, probably hasn't helped with the, players being consistent and keeping standards and et cetera consistent. So, yeah. I see a bright future in terms of your question for this England team, and I hope that in the short time that she has, we can have a really good medal Euros.
Excellent, yeah. And your career's pretty much tracked the professional women's football, really, when you look back. So aside from being paid to play, which is obviously huge, but what are the other changes you've seen from when you joined Chelsea at 12?
Lots. There's so much. There's, if you think about sports science in the game now, so in terms of the athleticism, it's certainly that's where the game's gone. there's that change. Diet and nutrition. I think people are more aware of what they should be fueling themselves with. The recovery. I mean, I remember you used to get people if you went down with a bucket and a sponge. So in terms of having physios that probably, you wouldn't play on with a broken leg, it would probably rule you out. The standard of coaching is improving. It's still got a way to go, I believe. But in terms of that's certainly improved. The tactical side of the coaching is there. I think we need a little bit more of the technical side in the women's game, just because we missed it.
Yeah.
But that's certainly there. The facilities, the fact that you can go into a bathroom, it sounds really petty, but you can go into a bathroom now or a changing room, and there's stuff that females can put there.
It's so important.
That they need in a men's toilet that we used to have to go in. They didn't consider that. So there's so many fans. We have people coming to watch, media attention. So there's lots of really positive changes, and long may it continue and continue to grow at the right speed, so that we don't get ahead of ourselves and like the American League did for so many years, kept collapsing, and hopefully we can just steadily progress. And
really interesting. And I guess it's such a different experience, isn't it, now for those girls turning up to play in academies? So do you think they appreciate the changes that players like you have seen across that time?
It's hard because you know what, it's not even like I get asked this, and players like, are you not jealous of what's, you know what, I'm not. And my only thing would be to players that now have what we didn't have starting out, is take advantage of it. That's all I would ask for players that are turning and coming into the women's game and the professional game. Take advantage of every opportunity you have, because we didn't have that. The question's out there: how far can female athletes, not just football athletes, go with the right resources? Now, our game is starting to have all of the resources that they need to make themselves that 1% better. And I'm not saying you're going to be, and everyone's going to be an international footballer, but every day you can get yourself that little bit better, a little bit better. And for me, I just hope with where the game is and how it's gone, these players that are now got the opportunity that, I didn't when I started out, and players before me that, paved the way for me to where I am now, just grab that opportunity with both hands. And that's all I ask. And that is what would make me happy, seeing an England team be successful in the future and sustain it, not just a one-off tournament, but sustain it. And I think the FA and the female clubs are trying their utmost to make sure that they have the right resources to make players better every day. And I just hope that they grab that opportunity.
Excellent. And how important do you think it is for young girls now to see those role models of strong, powerful, successful, female footballers and female athletes generally?
Yeah, and I think it's really important. As I said, growing up, I only watched Chelsea men. I didn't know they had a female team. I didn't know anything about female. You know what? Denise Lewis was probably the only female that I can remember, watching in athletics. I can really remember. I can't. Is it Sally Gunnell? Is that
Sally Gunnell?
Yeah. They were the two female athletes that I could only remember. So if I think about myself growing up, they were the only two females that were standouts that, every 4 years that, they'd be there and you'd be rooting them on. But yeah, there was no one for me in terms of wanting to be an athlete growing up. But yeah, it's great that, as I say, it's more visual for young players, whether that be through YouTube, like internet, whether it be through TV, whether it be through radio, whether it be through newspapers. They have those visuals now, so there's more connections in terms of, as a kid growing up, the more females that you're able to see. It obviously makes you believe there's an opportunity for you. Even in media, I don't ever remember a female media traveling with the England team. It was always Tony Layton at the time was the one guy that standout name that I remember traveling for England games and reporting on the England games. But it's great to see so many different females in different
roles,
etc. through sport, or not even just sport, but just in general, you get to see it. And I think it's important that young females get to see that.
Excellent. And early this year, you faced another significant challenge when you were diagnosed with a kidney disorder. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and how did you discover that you were so ill?
Through weight. No, I was I had an operation in the February. We've missed a year, haven't we? So February 2000 and
I keep doing that. I've lost track of every year.
Last year, February 2020, I had an operation on a hip injury that I got, and it wasn't long after that, so I was in recovery from that, and I was training, and I was at the later stage of my recovery, and I was really pushing on in terms of running. And I remember there was a couple of sessions I did with our physio, obviously social distance. I was meeting him in a park and we was trying to do a bit because football had been stopped in terms of the female football. And I remember coming home and I was in bed and I was like, oh, my calves are really, like my Achilles is really swollen. And I'd take pictures. And then when she saw me the next day, she's like, I can't touch you, but it doesn't look like anything's, muscle injuries. And then I'd go home again and it would be swollen. And I started to notice my face kept swelling, but I thought it was, hay fever and stuff. My hands had been swelling for a good couple of months off my walks. I was going on, we did in lockdown, you go on your walks. And it wasn't until I went on the treadmill in my garden, I was on the treadmill and I was like, I'm really struggling to breathe. Like I was finding the session harder than normal and my legs were just rubbing together. And I got really annoyed. I jumped off the treadmill and I said, look, I said to my partner, I'm going to go for a walk. We had our niece over at the time. And I said, and I'll take her to the park. And she's only got a little scooter. And I remember her asking me, can I hold the scooter? And I was like, why am I so breathless? Again, I didn't. I'm somebody that, even if I'm in pain, I have a really high threshold and I don't like to admit that I'm ill or I don't take any medication in terms of paracetamol, nothing. And I come back and, I run a bath and I got in it. And it wasn't until I got in a bath, I started, my stomach area and pubic area was really swollen.
Wow.
And so I panicked. I was like, this isn't normal. Got out and I took a couple of photos, rang my physio, sent her the picture. She must have thought, what are you sending me? And I was like, look, I'm really swollen. Like, what is it? And she was like, I think you should go to A&E. And obviously COVID, I'm like, no, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
They told me to ring our doctor and I'd never, our doctor was new at the club and I'd never spoken to him before. And I rang him and all he kept saying to me was, are your legs swollen? Press your legs. And I'm like, as I said, this time, my sole focus was my belly is out here. I don't care about my legs, my hands, my arms. I'm like, and I was just basically trying to explain what was going on. I rang the hospital and they the delay and they'd call back and they was like, you need to come into A&E, like you need to get yourself to the hospital. And so I did, and the next day they just did a urine and they noticed in the urine I was leaking loads of protein. And so they said, I think you've got this nephrotic syndrome. I think it's your kidneys that are leaking the protein into your body. And I went a few days later to get a kidney biopsy and diagnosed with nephrotic syndrome. But the funny thing about it was the doctor who'd never met me before rang our physio and was like, this girl, she sounds like a real hypochondriac. And she's like, you've just completely got her wrong. Look, this one player, if anyone, is definitely not like that. So it was quite funny that the perception off me because of this call. I probably did sound like that a little bit because as I said, I literally slept like this in terms of I sat up the whole night to sleep because when I laid flat, I guess I was swollen all over. So I guess the pressure was, in terms of breathing became really difficult. There was a little bit of fluid on the tissues around the lungs, but not actually on the lung. And that was just because of the leakage of the protein. So I'd leaked, there must have been, I was like about 8 kilos over my normal weight. So it was, a lot of fluid.
And how long do they think you'd had that for then? Has that been coming on over time or?
They don't know. I did ask the consultant this because I was like, what is it? Like, they was trying to explain it all to me. I mean, he said he thinks it could have been through some sort of infection. I don't know. But I mean, in terms of like, naturally, we only leak 5 grams of protein into our urine. I was leaking 930 grams of protein. So it was literally, he just explained it like, is it a colander? Like where your pasta's supposed to stay in and your water drains. He said, so basically explained it like the pasta was just falling through with it. And
oh my God.
Supposed to. So blood count was really low and it was scary times, but
And so you had treatment. So how did you carry on playing?
Well, I tried. Well, I couldn't. At first, I was on the highest dose of steroids you can be on. And so my immune system in terms of like being around people was really low. I was, through that I got tonsillitis. I was picking up silly little illnesses just because I guess I was really ill at the time. It wasn't until I got to the halfway point in terms of my medication that I was allowed to join with the team. And stupidly, the competitor, the attitude that my mum's always embedded in me is that, work is work. You have to turn up to work. If you're ill but you're able, you got to go. And football is work. And, I was ill, but I was able. I felt able. Even if I was, 40% able, I was able. And so I tried to fight it and go. And on reflection, I would never advise anybody to try and do that. And I would never do that again myself. And even, reflecting with my manager, I was like, I wish he took me out of it because I would never, I play on injuries. I get tears in my hamstrings or quads and I'm like, no, just strap it and I'll play. Just strap it and I'll play. But with an illness, it was it was different. You know, it was really, really different. And I just wish that I wasn't able to pull myself out. And I think, you know, people that know me, and I know my manager knows me really well, she probably knew that as well, but also knew how important football was to me in terms of how many, you know, when I mentioned obstacles that I've gone through in the past, that, you know, that football's been my go-to. I think that on her reflection was that I know that you've always needed football and it's always been there through good and bad. And so she tried to keep it there for me, but I wish she'd just said, look, you can't play. But hindsight is a wonderful thing. And on reflection, we both said, look, I wouldn't advise anybody to. But even now, though, you know, when people say, are you okay? I say yes, because if you ask me how I felt a year ago to today, I feel 10 times better. But in terms of feeling 100% in terms of myself, I'm probably at like 70% in terms of how I feel. Obviously, I've the weight's gone and I'm back to my normal self and I'm running. But yeah, just day to day, you know, like I get like fog vision and, you know, brain fog or whatever. I kind of like, I'm a little bit like, yeah, but not every day. And there's days where I feel really weak. Even still now, I'm trying to build muscle and finding it really difficult. So it has had a longer term impact on me. But they tell me to be patient because I was on steroids for 7 months and I've only been off them for 2.5 months. And they're like, you know, it will take time to rebuild.
It's long.
But I'm so impatient. I don't want time to rebuild it. I want it to happen. You know, I'm putting in the work and wanting it to come, and it's difficult.
And what's the long-term prognosis then, that they should be able to eventually you should be in remission and you'll be okay? Is that
I'm in remission now, and you continue. I will continuously go back and get checks. As I'm due back in maybe 4 weeks from now. And it's one of those that you can relapse at any point. People that spoke to me in the past about it have relapsed. Some people have had kidney transplants. So there's loads of different things. I mean, I'm like this, thinking it's a one-off and it's never going to come back, and hopefully that's the case. But yeah, it's one of those that they don't actually know whether you could be in remission for 10, 15 years and relapse. So it could be something that comes back. Hopefully it never does.
Hopefully not. And you mentioned your partner, and obviously she's been hugely supportive for you during this time. And I love your Instagram posts together. I guess through the podcast, we featured many incredible LGBTQ plus females who are athletes on the podcast in the past. So for you personally, how important is that you can be your authentic self on social media?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody. I'm saying I'm quite open. I don't really. I don't fight for any. You know, I don't fight for LGBT, but I'm quite open in terms of not being ashamed of who I am. I probably should do, or with my platform could probably do more. But in terms of just being able to accept who I am and put it out there is something that I guess when I was younger, you kind of hide a little bit. You don't want to admit that I guess you're gay to people because you don't want to be judged. But it's just something that I think I've learned to accept. And I'm able to just share it and don't really. I mean, people around me are very supportive of it and always have been and never judge me on that. We can laugh about it sometimes and whatever else. But yeah, I'm not somebody that shouts about it, but I'm certainly not somebody that hides who I am. And I'm accepted for that, which is for the people that I care about. So I don't care about anybody else.
Yeah, a fantastic attitude. Absolutely right. And I guess that's one of the positives on social media, on Instagram, that you can share that and normalise, fantastic, your relationship there. So I guess in terms of challenges, you have faced challenges throughout your career and you've talked about resilience. Where do you think that resilience comes from? Is that something you've built up over time, or is that something you think you've always had since you were a child?
Yeah, I think I've had it since I think I've had to be resilient as a child. I think seeing it in my mum, I think my mum's the most resilient, as I say, strongest, shows strength in abundance. So I think it's certainly something that has grown with me through different challenges in life. Yeah, and I've always tried to remain, mentally tough, and it's helped me in many ways, but it's also, has been, in terms of mental toughness, has probably been my... in terms of not being able to express sometimes how I feel and not being able to let people see the vulnerability in me.
Yeah.
And that's just because, as I say, that when my mum was vulnerable, she always made us see strength. And so through vulnerabilities, I've always tried to show that I'm strong, whether I'm weak anyway inside. So yeah, it was something that I guess she embedded in me, and just through seeing and doing. But yeah, it's also, I'm glad now I can show vulnerability, because for many years I couldn't, and I had this real thick barrier and wall in front of me, which probably didn't help me. It did in terms of sport, because you need to be resilient and you need to be, strong, and it's those that are resilient and mentally tough that really do stay at the top and get to the top, because it's, there's so many challenges in sport or in life that without that, you don't get that far. So it's helped me in that. But in terms of other things outside of sport, it's probably been a real downfall of mine, not being able to be open and leaving that, that wall there for people and not allow them in.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, that balance on both sides.
Yeah.
I heard you on BBC 5 Live commentating on the Lionesses this week, and seeing you on TV too. So I just wondered, I was thinking at the time, but how does it feel to commentate on England and those players that you know when you're not playing yourself? Is that something that you've really enjoyed?
Yeah, I enjoy it because I like talking football. I love, football is what I love, whether I'm talking it, playing it, coaching it, teaching it. I mean, some people find it more difficult. I'm just talking as a neutral. When I'm talking about I have no personal feelings towards any of those individuals or the team as a whole. When I'm talking about it, I just try and give an honest reflection of what I'm seeing, and I'll stand by that. And, people will judge me for that. And that's absolutely fine, because as I said really early on in our podcast, is that football is about opinions, and I'm just sharing what I'm seeing and feeling from a player point of view that is, trying to, or is doing some sort of transition into sort of media and talking football. And it's expected. I think some people sit on the fence sometimes because they've played with those players before, but I actually enjoy talking football, and I'll try and be as honest as I can, and I'll be true to who I am and what I think. But yeah, I do enjoy it. I'm saying more radio than TV. I'd like to be able, on TV to talk women's football and be confident with that. Who knows? Is
it something you're looking at for the future? You'd like to do more of that in the future?
I'd like to talk about football. As I say, coaching, media. If there's media opportunity, I mean, look, in growing up, media opportunities were never there for females. I didn't ever think about those opportunities. So I've always boxed myself off to just coaching. I'm going to be a coach because I love football and love sharing. But if there's opportunities, there's not really much difference in media talking football than there is coaching it, in terms of just being able to articulate your words differently in both settings. But yeah, I'd like to, if given the opportunity, I wouldn't rule it out.
Could you ever imagine a time in your future when football won't be a part of your life? So whether it's coaching or it's commentary or whatever you're doing, do you think it will always be football for you?
Yeah, no, I do. I think it will always be football unless I fall out of love with it. But I think it'll always be there.
What an interview, and what an incredible woman. Fara's so humble about all of her achievements. It'll be fascinating to see what she goes on to achieve in the future. If you'd like to know more about the other work that I do, including the Women's Sport Collective, a network for women working across sport, please visit fearlesswomen.co.uk. This is where you'll find out more about all 66 of my incredible guests from this and the previous series, and you can also listen to all the podcasts from the website too. Previous trailblazing footballers include Rachel Yankee, Kelly Smith, Jill Scott, Steph Horton and Eni Aluko. Thanks once again to Barclays for their kind support of the Game Changers, and also to Sam Walker from What Goes On Media, who does a great job as executive producer of the podcast. Do come and say hello on social media, where you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at The Game Changers or at Sue Anstis. Next week, I'm so excited to be talking to one of Britain's top sports broadcasters, Kelly Cates. I've no doubt you've seen Kelly on TV or listened to her on the radio, and she currently fronts Sky Sports coverage of the Premier League and BBC 5 Live sports coverage, including the World Cup, Olympics and Premier League. Kelly also presents a weekly show on the Global Premier League channel with a former guest on this podcast, Ian Wright.
Women get a very different kind of abuse from the abuse that men get if they put out a controversial opinion. So, yeah, and I think if a woman throws out a lazy opinion, which I think that male pundits have been guilty of, then I think it's picked up on immediately. But I think it's getting better. I do think it's getting better.
The Game Changers. Fearless women in sport.